Mark Twain made very popular saying that there are three kinds of lies. He didn't actually originate this saying. He made it very popular. He said there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. And if you actually research that phrase, you will find that the original version of that phrase was that there are lies, damned lies, and experts. What could be further from the truth than what we've got going on today, right? It's often said that 70% of the people will believe anything you tell them as long as you put a statistic with it. Now the other 30% of you in the room got that joke. First off, let's say you're in a situation where the boss just told you, guess what, we've got a new vaccine mandate. And you're going to have to get a vaccine or get fired. Now you heard already said, yes, I am an attorney. I'm here to talk to you specifically about the best method to fight employer-based vaccine mandates. Now there's a lot going on. As a matter of fact, later this week, I'm speaking to 3 different parents groups and school districts on how they can fight school mask mandates. I've helped a number of civil employees to qualify for their religious exemptions. I've talked to parents about their kids who are in military service. I've talked to parents about their students who are in universities. And each of these types of situations requires a different approach and a different tactic, but there are answers available out there. So specifically tonight, I want to focus on the issue of employer vaccine mandates. All right? First off, the question you might ask, well, is it actually legal? You heard a lot of talk about the Constitution and what the Constitution affords. Keep in mind, right, the Constitution is not the source of our rights. Who is the source of our rights? The Creator, right? The Constitution is a limiting document. The Constitution simply says the federal government can't do certain things. It is not there to enshrine our rights because they come from God. They're inviolable. They cannot be taken away. Always keep that in mind. So first question, however, we've built a construct, we've built a structure in this country based on various statutes, based on a lot of bureaucratic rules, and a lot of mandates and authority that have been given to bureaucracies due to sort of the what's the word I'm looking for, folks? The legislature basically not doing their work and giving that authority to the bureaucracies instead. So we need to challenge that. We need to stand up to that. The first off question is it legal? Is there a legal method to approach this? What are my options? Secondly, what's the best legal strategy? And what are the steps in the process? And then, of course, what everyone's always interested in is how much will it cost and how long will it take? All right, first question, is this even legal? Can employers require a vaccine mandate? The short answer is, this is a great lawyer term, probably. You notice how I hedge my bets there, right? Probably. You'll hear other legal terms that lawyers are famous for saying because there's an argument that can be made about anything. You can sue anybody over anything, right? The question is will your lawsuit be successful? And that's really what I'm here to talk about is a successful legal tactic that might gain some ground and buy you some time. So a lot of people point to this particular Supreme Court decision in 1905, the Jacobson v. Massachusetts decision. That's the one that everybody points to, the media makes much ado about, and they say, well, that Supreme Court decision says that yes, you can have vaccine mandates. You know, it's within constitutional prescriptions. You can do this. And they really often get the law completely wrong because if you actually go back and read that decision, you'll see that what that court actually said was, it's the legislature and not the courts that should determine whether vaccination is or is not the best method to protect the public health. It also said that the mode or manner in which those results are to be accomplished is within the discretion of the state. Now note here, they're saying states. State. Nowhere does it say in that Supreme Court decision anything about the federal government, right? And they use this thing called state police power. That's a phrase you might be familiar with. It's that section where they say they can use certain things to promote the general welfare or for public health and safety issues. But that decision limited to such action strictly to the states. Now, what they also don't point out is that Supreme Court decision actually said it's the legislature, not some bureaucracy, not some non-elected official, but only our elected representatives that can make these kinds of decisions. They also said that they can decide whether a vaccination is or is not the best method of protection for the public health and safety. So that means if a state legislature decides, look, we don't think this particular vaccine is in the best interest of the public health and safety, we're going to pass a law saying no. Guess what? According to Supreme Court precedent already in place, the very decision that the media likes to point to that says we can do this, that same decision would support our legislature in passing a law saying, no, you can't do this. And that's very important. That's why you've already heard it said, we have got to get this bill passed. Right? House Bill 248, get on the phone, call your representatives, get them off their cans, get it out of committee, get it to the floor for a vote. You've already heard a lot of speakers already talk about that. It's very important. This is the best long-term solution legally to fight any vaccine mandates. Now, same goes for mask mandates. There are two bills, one in the Senate, one in the House right now that have been introduced to prevent school districts from imposing mask mandates. Nina Vitale introduced a bill last year to stop anyone from imposing mask mandates. Again, those bills need to get into committee, out of committee, and onto the floor for a vote. So please, please, please call your representatives, get them off their duffs, get them doing their jobs. All right, moving on. Well, until that happens, what are my options? Let's say your employer says, get vaccinated by this date or you're fired. What are my options? Well, you get up and quit, but you've already heard the dangers that creates. If you willingly step away from your job, you lose a lot of potential unemployment benefits, workers' comp, and any other things that might be coming your way. So don't do that. Make them fire you. That would be better strategy legally. You could say, okay, I give up, I'll just go ahead and get vaccinated. And for those of you who really do have a sincerely held religious belief, do you want to violate your conscience in that way? Perhaps not. Another option is to say, well, I'm going to apply for an exemption. Well, who has to offer an exemption? Every employer with 15 or more employees in the state of Ohio has to offer both a medical and a religious exemption. Every employer of 15 or more employees in the state of Ohio has to offer a medical or religious exemption. So, okay, I apply for exemption, but let's say I get denied. Let's say they continue to harass me. Let's say they terminate me. Well, you can continue to stand your ground. You can go so far as to file a lawsuit if needed. Hopefully you don't have to go that far. So far, all of them, every single one of the Summit employees that I've helped through this process have been granted a religious exemption to vaccination. So those of you who are working in the healthcare field and feel like you've got no options, I'm here to tell you do have an option, and it is succeeding. All right. Walt Disney said, the way to get started is quit talking and begin doing. It's great to gather in meetings. I'm not against that. I'm all for that. Meetings are great for spreading information. But each of you here, you take the information you gather here, and you take it out, you speak to your neighbors, your friends, your family. You've got to spread that information on, and then information alone will do nothing unless people actually act on it. So we have to act. We have to stand up. You have to encourage people to, yes, stand up. All right, what then is the best legal strategy if your employer requires a vaccine mandate? Well, there are a lot of ways to contest it. Like I said, you can file a lawsuit over anything for any reason. But most, and sorry to say, but most of the lawsuits that are being filed on personal freedom, liberty, constitutional grounds, and all those kinds of things, most of those lawsuits are not succeeding, or they're being dismissed very, very early in the process. Very early. So, as we kind of put our heads together and we say, what is a strategy that could work? What is a strategy that could kind of gum up the system and slow things down in order to give our legislature time to act? And I think that's key here, because right now the push is on. The push is on federally, the push is on through the federal tax dollars, the push is on through the federal bureaucracy, and the push is on through Governor DeWine's office. And the push is on locally through your local ESC, your educational service centers, and your local school superintendents. Even if you have a board of a majority conservative count, oftentimes what we see are superintendents are just simply skipping board votes altogether. They're trying to issue decisions all on their own. So what is the best legal strategy to fight back against your employer if they have a vaccine mandate? We believe that the best strategy is to apply for a religious exemption. Most employers, as we said already, in Ohio, any employer with 15 or more employees, most employees are covered by Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. That's a federal law that prohibits religious discrimination in employment, and Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4112 also prohibits that kind of discrimination. And I will also note that the Ohio law is even more restrictive than the federal law is. So in Ohio, we're well positioned for this kind of legal strategy and legal approach. So, like I said, if your employer has not said, we're giving an exemption for medical or religious reasons, you very kindly and very politely inform them of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, or Ohio Revised Code Chapter 4112, and you say, well, but you kind of have to. So please give me my exemption application form. And when they do give you that exemption application form, fill it out and turn it in. And the key operative word that you need to keep in your mind is you must have a sincerely held religious belief. And you might think, well, I'm not a religious person. Matter of fact, maybe I'm an atheist. Let me assure you, the way the law, in this case, in civil rights litigation, the way the law defines religion is extremely broad. And I will talk about that in just a moment. The first and easiest line of attack in a sincerely held religious belief asking for an exemption for this particular vaccine is the argument that, well, all currently available COVID-19 vaccines were either developed with, produced by, or tested on fetal cell lines that were grown from cells taken from aborted babies a number of years ago. Right? I always encourage people, get your facts straight. Make sure you use the right language, because there wasn't a baby aborted yesterday and had its cells harvested in this process. These were babies that were aborted quite a few years ago. From the cells that were taken from them, they continued to culture new cells and new cells over a period of years. And it's those cells that were used either in the production, the testing, or the development of the various vaccines. And you see a bunch of them up there, some of which you may or may not have heard of, because generally we only talk about the first 3 in the U.S. But also let me assure you there are over 100 additional vaccines that are in current human trial testing. And there are probably another 75 after that are in animal testing and are on the way. So I know of only one company in Germany that is trying to develop a vaccine without any use in any form of any kind of fetal cells. So far they've had no success in
any success in developing that vaccine. So while we can, we need to use this argument. And that's a very common, very open, and very well-accepted religious belief that very few people are going to question. However, it's not the only approach. I have read dozens of people's explanation letters explaining their sincerely held religious belief. And some of them are very touching. Some of them are quite moving. Some of them have all kinds of defenses and explanations for them. Some of them talk about being created in the image of God. And I have some Bible verses up there that can support that. Some of them talk about this is indicative of the mark of the beast. One of the best articles I read on that subject was written by a non-Christian. And he says the mask is the mark of the beast in larval form. And I want to close by reading an excerpt from his article when we get to that point. Don't jump the gun, we're not ready to close just yet. But he really nails that subject and nails it quite well. So people are talking about that, and they equate it with the vaccines and various other things, right? Because, oh my goodness, when in the history of the world has there been a worldwide mandate that you must do something in order to engage in commerce? Never. Hasn't happened in the history of the world. So this is a very useful defense as well. Others are just talking about the whole issue of fear in general. We're not to be fearmongers, right? The Bible repeatedly tells us, fear not. There's a number of verses there that you can use in conjunction with that as well. Now you step back and say, well, you've got a lot of Bible verses up there, maybe I'm not even a Christian, right? Again, I said that word religion is defined very, very broadly. We have an attorney in our office who's quite proud of talking about the case where she had to represent an employer against an employee who said he was of the religion of Buddhism and it was against his religion to wear a hat in the workplace. Because Big Lebowski didn't wear a hat, man. Guess what? The way the rules are written, the employer cannot question the sincerity of your religious belief. They have to presume that it's genuine. So I hear a lot of people say, well, they've asked me for a letter from my clergy. Guess what? You don't need one. Well, I'm Catholic and the Pope said it's okay to get this. Who cares? You do not need to practice the tenets of your specific faith. This is a personal, sincerely held religious belief. It is personal to you and you only, and no one can question that. As a matter of fact, the only way that an employer can ask for additional documentation from you is if they have what's called an objective basis for doubting your sincerity. Well, what does that mean? It means they have to know some specific fact about you that would call into question the sincerity. Let me give you a hypothetical. You're filling out your exemption form in front of your coworker and says, yeah, I don't really believe this stuff. This is all a bunch of crap, but I'm just putting it down so I can get out of the job. And your coworker hears that and goes to the boss and says, guess what Sally just said? She doesn't believe this at all. Well, guess what? The employer now has some objective basis. He has a known fact about you that he can say, well, wait a minute, we're not sure that this is a sincerely held religious belief. So don't make those mistakes, right? But again, most people in this room shouldn't have to search your hearts very hard to find some ground to say, hey, I just have a deep, abiding conviction that goes to the very core of who I am, to the very spirit within me that says this is wrong. It doesn't need to be a Christian faith. It just simply needs to be something that the law would consider to be religious in nature. Don't use the words, it's my personal preference. Don't use the words, it's my conclusion that I come to in my mind. It has to go deeper and broader and have more of a spiritual impact than just that. So, moving on though, what is the process? Well, first off, the process is to fill out the exemption form. Fill out the exemption form. And as I've assisted healthcare workers in doing this, we've succeeded in getting them granted. I've assisted several university students in getting granted exemptions as well. And I'm working with a mother to try to help her 2 military service members. That is a very difficult situation. Because generally in the military, if you refuse an order, you get a dishonorable discharge. So there's actually some movement in the U.S. House right now to introduce a bill to at least allow service members an honorable discharge if they refuse the vaccine. But what does this administration care? Right? They want all people of faith and all people of conscience and all people who are of conviction and willing to stand up for what is right. They want them out of the military anyways. So they'll probably get into that. They'll probably say, okay, we'll give you your honorable discharge, now please go away. So we can staff our military with who will follow orders. Yes, right? Follow orders, just follow the orders. Right? We've heard all that before. All right. So you file an exemption, but let's say you get denied. Or let's say that during the review process, they come back and they ask you for all kinds of additional documentation. Or let's say that during the review process, they start to harass you. They start to say, well, come on, really? You know, I'm just so frustrated with you. Guess what? You get toilet duty for the next 2 weeks. Let's say they discriminate against you. Let's say they isolate you from other workers and things like that. So now it's bordering on harassment. Let's say they delay issuing a ruling on your exemption. Or let's say, worst case scenario, they actually fire you before even giving you a ruling on your exemption. That is then when you initiate what's called a civil rights complaint. Now, in a civil rights litigation, you have to follow this process before you can file a lawsuit. That's under both federal law and Ohio law as well. So you can't just run off and file a lawsuit saying I've been discriminated against. You have to file this sort of bureaucratic administrative process first. So let's say you've been denied, you've been harassed, you've been discriminated against, or you've been terminated in some way. Then the next step would be to file a complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. Very easy to do. You'll pull up the website right here, charge filing procedure. It takes you to this page with a big green button. It's like the easy button at Staples, right? You just bang that thing and you're off and running. What's great about the Ohio Civil Rights Commission is they will investigate your complaint, and if it also meets the federal EEOC requirements, they will also initiate the complaint process with the federal government, with the EEOC as well. So you only have to go to one place to start this process off. All right. So then what is the process? Well, not to bore you here with a bunch of details. I did have a number of handouts, which I saw people poaching ahead of time here. So whatever is left, you're welcome to it. I've got business cards there. You can email me. I can give you this presentation. I can give you more details. If you have specific cases that you're interested in getting assistance with, I can offer that as well. But very quickly to go through it, you would file a complaint with the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. Next in the process is they would first off then go to your employer, and they would say, well, let's sit down and see if we can't iron this out. Right? They would have this mediation process. If that works, great. If it doesn't, then they take it to the next step, which is to actually initiate an investigation. If they conduct an investigation and they determine that there was a violation of the civil rights law, either Ohio or federal law, then they will take it to the next step. If for any reason they conduct an investigation and they say, no, there was no violation of the law here, then it's very important that you ask of them for a notice of a right to sue. Notice of a right to sue. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So if they've conducted an investigation, if they find out that yes, indeed, you have been discriminated against on a religious basis or any other grounds under those Title VII or Ohio civil rights law, then they will conduct a settlement discussion. Well, settlement is a little different than mediation. Settlement basically tells the employer, hey, we found some violations, you're probably going to get fined, and so you better figure out a way to get out from under this. That's what settlement is. Now, some employers will dig in their heels and they'll say, I'm not paying a dime to the government, I'm not going to bend my rules, I'm not going to give in, this employee is a deadbeat, go away. If settlement doesn't succeed, then the EEOC or the Ohio Civil Rights Commission has the option of filing their own lawsuit against the employer. Has the option of filing their own lawsuit against the employer. Depending on the situation, my prediction is that as more and more of these cases start to pile up, they will simply decline to file their own lawsuits. They might find a violation, but they'll simply say, there's not a big enough fine we can assess, or we don't want to get in the middle of this, or we're just simply declining to exercise jurisdiction, and they sort of walk away from it. If that happens, then by all means, you ask of them to give you a notice of a right to sue. Now, if at any point in this process, the EEOC or the Ohio Civil Rights Commission tells you we're not taking it to the next level, you need to ask for a notice of a right to sue. You have a certain time limit then in which you can file either a state or a federal lawsuit, depending on your grounds for violation. All right. So that's generally the process. It's not overly complicated. So why would you do that? Well, first of all, what we're finding is that most employers are realizing that there's far more employees that are starting to stand up and say no than what they anticipated. They thought most people would just cave. So you got to have another demonstration down at SUMA, I heard, this next week or this coming week. That's great. But the downside of it is SUMA has lost so many employees that they're reducing their bed capacity by 20%. Because they don't have enough employees to staff the beds. So this really backfired on them. They thought most employees would just kind of cave. And instead, employees are either filing for an exemption or just simply resigning and walking away. My encouragement is if you want to fight for freedom, don't just resign and walk away. File for an exemption or make them fire you. The only way they can deny your exemption is if it creates for them an undue hardship. Well, they're going to argue, well, of course it creates an undue hardship because you're putting patient safety at risk, right? Well, it's amazing, but in the case of SUMA, they mandated it not only for all of their frontline nursing staff, but even those who were working at home, and even those who were vendors, interns, and students. They require everybody to be vaccinated. So they've already proven that their vaccine mandate is not based on anything related to patient safety. We're finding similar types of overbreadth in a lot of the healthcare type settings. They just are overreaching. They have to give you an accommodation. They have to make an accommodation. They have to find a way to keep you employed and keep you active, even if that includes maybe a transfer in your position. If it truly is an issue for them of patient safety, there are things that you can still do to keep your job. Now, here's the beauty of starting this process. During this process, if they fire you once you filed a complaint, then it's big time trouble for them, because that's a retaliation lawsuit. It's an immediate retaliation lawsuit. And employers just pretty much get slammed when they fire somebody after a complaint has been initiated. So I tell people, look, file the exemption. Don't wait around. Don't delay. As soon as your employer puts a mandate on, file for an exemption. And then don't wait around. If they say, well, we'll give us 30 days. Well, give them 30 days, but on day 31, say, hey, yes or no. Because if you're going to deny me, Here's what I'm going to do. And start this process going. Because once you start this process, guess what? You're buying time in your job. So people ask, how much would it cost and how long would it take? Famous lawyer words, well, it depends. One of the things I always say, I'm a litigation specialist. That means I sue people, right? You can't control the other side in litigation. So if the other side chooses to dig in their heels and fight, then it takes a long time and it gets very expensive. But what is the goal here? Is the goal to win some big judgment down the road? Or is the goal to initiate a process that sort of just mucks up the system a little bit to get our legislature time to get House Bill 248 and some of these mass mandate bills passed, right? So to that end, how long will it take? Well, this is from the Ohio Civil Rights Commission website. It says, based on analysis of the information collected, the OCRC will issue a written recommendation as to whether there is a violation of Ohio's laws against discrimination, and the Ohio Civil Rights Commission has 1 year to complete the investigation. Isn't that amazing? You mean I could keep my job for up to an additional year? What's happening a year from now? So we're going to be pretty darn close to midterms, right? Here's the federal EEOC website. What you expect after you file the charge. How long the investigation takes depends on many factors, including the amount of information that needs to be gathered and analyzed. On average, we take approximately 10 months to investigate a charge. That's just to investigate. Now, I will tell you, there are a lot of these complaints being filed. And that number, 10 months, is going to get much, much larger here very soon. So, again, the strategy is find a way to keep your job, keep your income coming in, keep you able to be active doing everything else that you're doing out there in the community, give our legislature time to act, and maybe buy us enough time to get us to the next election cycle, right? So, that's all I have. I ran through it quick, tried to make it short and sweet, but I want to open the floor for questions if you have. But before I do that, I want to read from this article that I said I would close with. The mask is the mark of the beast in larval form. Now, I don't agree with a lot of what this guy writes or where he's coming from. He's not a believer in any means. But he said, look, he says, people don't seem to fully comprehend what is being given away in this desperate hour. But without a doubt, they will feel it and long to have it back in the coming dystopian future. My sense is that we are losing something exclusively human. That the masks actually alter the way we view each other, and that they shift our perception of others away from trust. Where once we saw smiles and community, now we see furrowed brows, concern, and hazard. I feel we are jumping headlong into the dark abyss of fear, giving power and precedence to the inner authoritarian, and that as we forfeit bits of self-integrity to go along to get along, we become envious and agitated with those who wish not to comply. Call it what you want, but if you want to feed your family today, you better mask up. He wrote this a year and a half ago, actually. And he says, and if you're reading this beyond 2020, which we are, I hope that time has proven me wrong, which it hasn't. And that we have somehow collectively managed to squash this wicked bug before it evolves into its full form. That's the task before us, right? Like Barney Fife used to say, we gotta nip it. Nip it in the bud. All right, questions?